Hello and welcome to the Fast Performance Podcast. My name is Joel Rather. I am here with JC, John Cole, today. He's my stand-in as well as most of the time. Scotty has hit a few of these. We've got Scott Long, who is our podcast producer / athletic trainer and whatever else, if you watched our podcast before. And
/ gopher.
Slash a lot of things, but we task him out with plenty, as we typically do. But in the studio today, online studio today,
Yep.
we have a friend of mine, someone who I met quite a few years ago now, and we had done some things together back when I worked at the NSCA, Scott Moody. Good to reconnect with him. Scott is in the Overland Park area in Kansas City, and he founded AthleteFIT. AthleteFIT is FIT is an acronym for Functionally Integrated Training. And his methods blend physical skills, sport, and fitness with the technical, tactical application of those skills to enhance one's ability to bridge this physical, technical gap and make a broader impact on the game. Scott is an internationally known speaker. He's published author. He's an app creator as well. If you go to his site, you'll find that app, which is very cool. And he's coached just a multitude of athletes from the high school level all the way up to the professional level, including World Cup champions, Olympians, and Olympic medalists as well. So in addition to that, he also offers AthleteFIT workshops that have been taught across North America, Asia, and Europe since 2010, and with Olympic-level athletes, coaches, personal trainers, and fitness studio owners. So he works as a consultant, and I know in the past has worked with a variety of different companies and manufacturers that design and functionality of new products and the development of training programs to help engage users and work with facility owners to maximize their space and efficiency, which is that's a mouthful. So, yeah, but I definitely don't want to shortchange you because as the listeners will find out, you have done a ton across a lot of different mediums within the strength, conditioning, fitness, and sport world. And so we want to welcome Scott. Scott, how are you today?
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So just before the show, we were talking just a little bit about, kind of how the climate has been for you. You kind of mentioned that you have been relatively lucky in terms of functionality and things like that. Everybody's had varying levels of how they've been affected by the current climate. And, for you, let's talk a little bit about your setup. I know you have it's a very kind of unique setup in that you are connected very closely to a soccer-based facility. So kind of talk to us a little bit about more of your structure and facility and kind of integration that you have there.
So we've got several thousand square feet of training space inside a field house. So we've got our offices inside that. The field house is located, sits right in the middle of 12 soccer fields that we have access to the turf. It's a pretty massive complex that gives us the ability to get inside, outside, use a lot of different areas of the facility. So when this all hit and everything started to shut down, they allowed us to see a certain number of people in a set amount of space. So we could spread those people out throughout the facility. We could spread them inside, outside, in different areas. So it hasn't hit us as hard as it's hit some people, but it's also added a little bit of creativity into how we, run groups and run classes and can organize our space a little bit more efficiently. So it's been okay with us. We weren't hit that hard.
Well, that's a breath of fresh air because I think, as we mentioned, we've had obviously our challenges here and some of the things where we don't have that outdoor access,
Right.
which believe it or not, for us, like a lot of times as we come into this time of year, we're doing combine prep and things like that, and we'd always talk to athletes and say, like, hey, bro, how cold is it going to be there? Like, and we actually we kind of tracked for about 4 years, like the percentage of times that even here in Colorado that we trained outdoors even during this time of year. And it is still pretty available to us. And I think about 40% of the time we're still able to get outside. So for you, very similar, right? You're in a place where, cold weather and things like that are going to affect you at this time of year. And to have that flexibility is definitely huge, especially now where there's so many things that we're learning to account for in different kind of facets. So, but moving on, I think that the thing that most intrigued me was, the first few times that I either watched you present with some practical application stuff, is just your approach. I think that you have a very unique way with which you teach integration of movement and power and your programming. Let's talk a little bit about that and kind of how you maybe at the very early stages kind of progress with your athletes, because I think that I've always loved watching how your coaching style, but also just the development of the way you drill things and teach skills to athletes that are either technical or tactical in nature.
I would try to keep this as short as possible, but
we got plenty of time, Scott.
So this is our 21st year of being in business. So in the early stages, we were primarily a jump training facility. Volleyball, basketball was our primary clientele. And, everything was just built on power, Olympic lifting progressions, jump training programs, plyo programs. And that was kind of our sweet spot. In, I think it was 2006 or 7, I had a soccer coach come to me. He had a team. It was a pretty good team. And he said, I want you to work speed and agility stuff with my soccer team. I'd never played soccer. I'd never watched soccer, didn't know anybody who played soccer. And he's like, no, that's okay. Just do your thing. Just do your speed and agility work. I'm sure it'll be fine. So that team, like I said, was a really good team. They won a national championship on the club level that year. And within 6 months, we were flooded with soccer players. So much that by the time volleyball got out of season and they came back in the off season to train with us, we had no space. So almost overnight, we went from this jump training program to a soccer training program, and I had no idea what to do. So I was like, we are going to have to understand this sport. We're going to have to look at it, through kind of different eyes, but still stay true to what we are. I didn't want to try to be something I'm not. So what we did is we came up with a system that allowed us to take the what I would say critical aspects of the game, those key movements that have an impact, in the game, different defensive positioning strategies, things like that, different types of runs, different, how do they, in contact situations, how do they manipulate their body to take contact and stay safe? And we came up with a system that kind of broke down those key aspects of the game into phases. So we could understand the movements a little bit better. We came up with key positions. We looked at, how they moved through those positions, how they created momentum, how they controlled their momentum, how they found balance and stability. And then we started connecting those things with exercises. And it became very apparent that some of the exercises were new. Some of them were fairly innovative. For instance, when we're taking, contact in a, across the frontal plane or from a lateral side, we needed a horizontal force component, horizontal loading component. So med balls and cable training, came into play. So we came up with some cool ideas there on how to teach and strengthen agility through cable and med ball work. So just a lot of different things, but it allowed us to get creative with the programming, stay true to what we were as a strength and power training facility, and then start to blend in the movements of the game. After a couple of years of that, I had so many players and coaches saying, we need our players to play quicker. We need them to be more confident with the ball. Is there any way you could work some skill into the training program? And I mean, you can imagine how that would have stressed me out. I don't know anything about the skill. But once we started, we took the same approach to skill. We broke it down by phase, looked at how they move. And then we started teaching skill from more of an athletic positioning standpoint, how they reposition their feet around the ball, how they create a more dynamic athletic stance, how they could generate more power. And all of a sudden, our skill training program just exploded. And, we were able to integrate the skill in with the agility programs and the quickness programs. And what we found is with our more advanced athletes, our better players, we're saving time. They could directly see how this was impacting their game.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how this integrated approach came to be. Over time, we got back into volleyball, basketball, football. We got back into the other sports. And we used this same approach of understanding the movement, understanding the skills, understanding the tactical positioning strategies, and tried to blend it all together into a training program that could really impact the players in a positive way. So sorry for ranting, but that's
it. That's all. No, I think that it, like you said, it's such an interesting progression, and I actually can really assimilate with this because for me, in exact almost context with a parallel is my involvement with lacrosse. And I started at University of Denver in 2002. I was tasked with training the men's lacrosse team there, and I fast forward now to where it's now 19 years later, and I'm still training lacrosse players, and mainly, professional and high school and college level, kind of. But I get that all the time where people go, well, where'd you play? What, and all this type of stuff. And I'm sure you've probably had the same question countless amounts of times. And I think it speaks to the profession in that one of the things that we talk about in programming all the time is a needs analysis, as part of what we do and how we start to take what we know from our teaching, from our education, and from everything else, and then take that in turn and utilize it either biomechanically, physiologically, or whatever that might be, to then apply what we know back to a sport, even though we never maybe played in that sport. And I think that it speaks volumes to looking at what you do now and how you approach and how you attack the training of players. And if you go and look up Scott and anything he's done as far as some of the things that he just mentioned, it's just awesome to see that integration as you talked about and how you went from like, I don't really know anything about this, coach, to now looking at, how much you've really just meshed all these things in together, which then translates to these aha moments for athletes where they go, oh, we talk about this all the time with athletes where our mission in a lot of cases is we are trying to get them to understand how things that we're asking them to do translate out into the playing field. Right. And I think that's a huge aspect and so blaringly obvious when you watch some of the things that you do and how you do them within your training there. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it's all skills, no matter what the sport. That's why the athlete comes to you. They want to be better in game situations. They want to move better, quicker. They're not there to run a faster 40 typically, unless they're training for a combine. They're there to get better at their sport. So the more we can integrate those pieces into it, or at least have the discussions of how this drill is going to impact a certain in-game performance aspect, you get buy-in and you get focus, you get motivation, and it starts to spiral upward where they find so much benefit in what you're doing. And I think I've learned more from the players than they'll ever learn from me. I ask questions because obviously I never played a lot of these sports, volleyball, soccer. So I'm like, hey, how does this feel? And tell me how you would apply this in a game, or tell me how this is going to impact your game. And the conversations we get into just spur on new exercises, new drills, different ways that I can coach and relate to players. So communication is 100%. It's number one with your athletes.
Well, here's if we can dive into that vein for a second, Scott, because I know a good portion of the athletes that you train and do education work with are, the youth athlete population. And, we have these conversations and we kind of crack up, around the office and on the floor when we're talking about the level of specificity that, some parents, some coaches demand of the youth athlete. And I was always a fan, and still am, of saying, why are we fine-tuning the plane when the pilot can't fly it straight? So if you can speak a little bit to that, because I know you're digging into like learning about that particular sport and learning about the things that need to come out of there. But at what point do you say, okay, that level of specificity is really not appropriate for this athlete because they can't get from point A to point B efficiently yet? And maybe you can just kind of go down that rabbit hole with us a little bit there and tell us what your thoughts are.
I'll start with a quick story that happened a couple of weeks ago. We had an intern that was watching me work with a young group of volleyball players. And this is a young, very raw group of middle school volleyball players. And they were having some issues with, just typical knee tracking, pelvic control. And the intern came to me and said, hey, have you ever thought about like isolating some things and really focusing on, certain muscles that control? And these athletes at that level, if you asked them to isolate something, they would have no idea. You tell them to tighten their abs,
right,
and they have no idea how to do it.
Right.
So my view of, foundational level training, young athletes, more of a full body coordination movement pattern. If you just take squatting, for instance, we want to talk to them about, control. We want to get them in the right positions. We want to start with more of an isometric, eccentric, slow focused, build rhythm. But then we want to hit that squat pattern, not just squatting, not putting dumbbells in their hands, but we want to hit it from as many different ways as we can. So we'll add bouncing to it. So bouncing with a light drop into a squat. We'll do stair hops with a focus on the eccentric control. Not stair hops, but stair jumps and landing. As many different ways as we can challenge the squat, we will do that so that we broaden this foundation so wide and they become so stable that no matter how they're asked to do it, they gain that ability, that confidence, and that control in the pattern. So we're not a start off and let's try to identify this one imbalance and fix that one thing, because as soon as we go into isolation, then we've got another problem. And now we're fixing all these little problems. At the end of the day, they still can't jump and land. And they haven't been taught to produce any force or control force or create momentum or accelerate. So, and these kids are out playing their sport anyway. They're doing all these activities anyway. If we can control them, refine them, broaden that confident foundation and solidify that, then that's where we win with the younger level athletes.
Yeah, I just actually this morning I was cruising the NSCA high school lacrosse SIG, and sure enough, a coach posted about the fact that they couldn't even get an athlete's arms, opposite arm, opposite leg, cross extensor activation. They had to teach them how to do a jumping jack, right? And going back to this, and this is something else I bang the drum on a lot too, is like we all grew up in the jump rope generation, right? We all knew how to jump rope, and now you throw some of these kids a jump rope and they can't connect it because those fundamental movement patterns have been lost. And it's almost like we have an entire society of athletes that are running around out there participating in the sport that really don't have a concept of what those fundamental movement patterns should look like.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, if you wanted to get a rabbit hole going or a soapbox, this right hits right home for me. But fire away, Scott.
Yeah.
So here's a specific example. We have another volleyball team that's a decent team that coach is like, we just don't jump quick enough. We are getting beat with quickness at the net. So we brought them in. These kids can't bounce.
Right.
Just typical jumping jack type, bounces, jump rope type bounces. And then we started going back to my breaking down movement. We looked at, okay, how do they block at the net? If they're stationary, a lot of times it's not a traditional counter movement jump where they drop down near parallel and jump up. It's usually a bounce into a quick, more plyometric or dynamic motion. or a sidestep, almost like a shuffle type position where they control their momentum and jump. And the approach jump, it's the same thing. It's that shuffle stop where they kind of come in side on or lateral in a shuffle type position to control the forward momentum into a accelerate into the vertical motion. And then we started shuffling with them. They can't shuffle. I mean, they're out of control in the shuffle. They can't control their body. No wonder they can't jump.
Right.
They can't bounce. They can't land. They can't shuffle. So we put in warm-ups, and literally we'd go 20 minutes of different types of bouncing, different styles of bouncing, different types of shuffles and different things. And all of a sudden, within 6 weeks, approach verticals are up 3-4 inches. Not because they gain that power, but they can control their body and they learn to time those movements. If we'd have never looked into how they're actually jumping and just got into a jump training program, we'd be pulling our hair out, and they'd still be terrible on the court. So,
I mean, you're a miracle worker.
Break down the movements they do into phases. The preparatory phase. How do they prepare their body to perform the task? How do they execute the task? And then how do they transition to the next task? And then you look at those 3 phases and you say, okay, what are the primary positions that they get their body into? Connect those with exercises. That's just like a shuffle. That's just like a hop. That's a lateral hop, whatever. And all of a sudden you start to broaden that foundation with those simpler patterns and then tie it all into the movements of their sport, and confidence goes up. They start attacking things aggressively. They feel better in the way that they move. And I'm like, practices, warm-ups should include these types of activities every day.
Right.
And they just don't.
Yeah.
So that's...
I can't agree more. Like I find it interesting now where I think even just very, very recently in the last couple of months, I mean, one of the things that I've found myself doing is going through these processes within my warm-up that I do. And, of course, you can get into all types of discussions, types of warm-ups and what have you, but starting to expand the warm-up and also looking at it from a density perspective. An athlete comes in, works out with me for an hour on average, right? Of course, whoever decided that, we'll never know. But that's the altruistic sweet spot of how long a workout's supposed to go, apparently. But I look at that and I say, okay, we're going to start with, soft tissue work. We're going to get into general preparation. We're going to do basic readiness. Then we're going to work our way up in terms of heart rate. And then we're going to start gradually getting into rhythmic-based stuff. We're going to wake up the nervous system. We're going to do all these basic things. And I find that recently I'm starting to even just add more and add more and add more to this. And now all of a sudden kids are like, are we still warming up? And you're like, well, yeah, because you want to do these higher level things, but at the very basic level of a lot of these things, I need you to know how to skip forward. Like I always tell people this all the time. Your first test with me, all right, here we go. Jog down, jog back, and skip forward, and then skip backwards. And skip backwards, all of a sudden the wheels fall off the wagon with a large percentage of youth athletes, and they're like, oh, I don't know how to do that. And you're like, well, there's hurdle number 1 for us right out of the gate. Like these are such basic level things. And again, I talk about like a soapbox, if you will. We look at physical education in the country and things like that. And it's like, those are some of the basic building blocks of movement and education during the most critical times of maturation that we have just literally just thrown and cast into the wind. And yet when we look at what we do and what the expectation is from a youth perspective, a high school perspective of what coaches and parents want, we are in a lot of cases those two things are not matching up based on the fact that we haven't exposed them to some of these basic things like you talked about: bounce, right, skip, jump rope, just rhythmic patterning. I always say that rhythmic patterning to me is the gateway to movement, right? If they can't coordinate rhythmic patterns, then the odds of them being able to accelerate, decelerate under control, move in all planes of motion is we're already handcuffed before we ever start.
Right. We always say, I don't want our athletes to know when the warm-up stopped and when the training started.
There you go.
Yeah.
I want it to be smooth all the way through to where one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. Before long, we're 45 minutes in, and it's not been, the warm-up's over, now we move on to this.
Right. Yeah, without question. So let's we're going to switch gears just a little bit because this is something that I personally want to talk to you about because I know we've had this discussion years ago, and it's something that, as I mentioned in the email that I sent to you, and you kind of alluded to it early on, which was your kind of plyometric and jump training and some of these things. And I can recall the first time where I felt at this instant when I saw you begin to kind of break it down, and you'll know what I'm talking about here in a second, where I went, holy crap, like that's what I've been thinking, and I just have never really said anything about it. And I finally met someone who thinks the same way that I do about this, and that is this jump training kind of thinking where we grew up where when we got taught plyometrics, it was jump and land and be soft and all these other things, right? We always want to be absorbing everything and whatever. And there's an aspect to that we can all agree is important. But I always felt that when we think of it from a sport perspective, and I think there's a term out there like tensegrity, someone tried to coin that or whatever, I won't give anyone credit for that, but we all kind of know where there's a level of rigidity that comes in sport that usually comes through transition of movement that to me is so critical. And you were the first person I saw like stand up in front of everybody and go, no. When you land, I want you to land with some integrity. Right. And to think about resisting the floor and being solid. Talk to us a little bit about maybe that and your kind of where that came from for you. And maybe I already described it, but I've just always taken that. And to this day, I still utilize that kind of philosophy in how we teach, how I teach plyometrics.
So early on, we were working with a return to sport athlete coming off a lower extremity injury. And in physical therapy, everything had been soft and quiet and full range of motion, which I understand. That's the first step. Get them to be able to control their body and go through full range of motion. But then they were cleared to come back and play, and they couldn't stop. Like they had no idea where to land in that power position. So we started, looking at it and saying, okay, I don't want you down that deep on the court, because you can't move out of that position.
Right.
So let's identify this power position. Where do you feel that you are most explosive? That's where I want you to stick the landing. And getting into box jumps. Well, I can jump on that higher box. I know you can, but you're just going to pick your feet up and you're going to land so deep, that we're not actually going to be able to move out of that position. So I only want you to use a box that is that you can jump high enough that you can land in a position you can jump out of. So we started doing stuff like that. We started talking about sticking the landing in that power position. We got into activities that we call drop sticks from even our sprint start training program, where they start tall and they drop into a kind of a quarter lunge position with a forward lean, similar to a forward stance sprint start. Switching the feet, being able to control their body in that position. So initiating contact with the floor. Don't let the floor come to you, then realize you're on the ground and slowly try to catch the body.
Right.
Let's go pre-activate the muscles. Let's put force into the ground, ready to push. And that kind of drove our plyometric training, drove our speed training, drove our sprint start program into how we coach them to be stiffer, how we coach them to be a little bit more elastic and dynamic in the way that they move and not get into positions they can't get out of.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing is like you said, positions to get out of. I talk a lot about when you speak about that type of environment, especially when you put them out onto the pitch or court or field or whatever it is, you say, now add chaos to that environment. And if you get into that position you can't get out of in a chaotic environment where reaction and stimulus is going to inevitably be the reason that you're in that position, that's when the rubber meets the road. That's where everything falls apart. And if they're incapable of learning how to better position themselves, right? Learning how to react to that stimulus better, reactionary or whatever that might be, visually, audially, tactily, or whatever, then that to me is where you're going to need to have a pretty good athletic training staff. You're going to need to know a pretty good physical therapist, because you're going to get a lot of people that are going to visit them. Would you agree with that?
Well, and to your point, Scott, I think, and this is one of the places that, Joel and I, at a friendly level went back and forth when we started working together, because for me, I came from an alpine skiing background, training mostly winter sport athletes. And when we talk about soft plyometric landings, if they go into that explosive position and they're making a harder, stiffer landing in an edge transition, the skis go away, race is over. So they have to figure out how to get into that soft transition and build a power position sort of gradually. But that doesn't necessarily translate to field sports. And that was one of the things that he talked about. And, of course, he brought up your name right away. And I was like, I better take a look at this. And sure enough, I did. I looked at a couple of your videos and I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. I kind of get that a little bit more from the transition between, good landing mechanics and then the specificity of sport. And the last piece with that is that, we work so close with Howard Head Sports Medicine and the Stedman Clinic guys up in Vail and everybody else, and they're always saying, land soft, reduce the impact, ding, 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 ding. That's terrific for what you're doing for, like you said, a return to sport program. But is that realistic for actual field movement? And I think that's another rabbit hole you could go down pretty fast, between the sort of the perpendicular aspect of sport performance versus, sport rehabilitation.
Right. And to touch on that, in our warm-up reps, in our, we do go through full range of motion in
Right.
things.
Yeah.
I want people to control their body there. But when we're talking about plyo speed, stuff like that, even like bounding and skipping, with our weaker athletes that don't know how to do that, you see the hips drop, their foot hits the ground, everything kind of softens, and they're the slow ones. They're the ones that can't put force into the ground rapidly enough. They can't become stiff enough, and it's an aspect that has to be taught.
Yeah,
without question. So thinking of that, you get a group of kids that come in, and obviously a lot of first kind of assessment pieces go into play where you're going to look at the athletes as a group. How do you start kind of attacking that? Do you separate kids out? What's your assessment process? I don't want to get too much into like, hey, do you do an FMS and all this and that and whatever, like that, that's not necessarily where I want to head, but more so knowing that, because like I can think of a couple athletes that I work with right now where they came to me, said, we need to be better in movements, agility, especially frontal plane agility, whatever. I've got a soccer goalie, I've got a soccer forward, I've got some other kids, and I look at them and in my assessment I go, well, we're not going to move much better in any of those kind of dynamics if we don't start here. Like, where's that process for you? How do you kind of attack that? Because I know you do get a lot of group setting stuff. I think a lot of what you do is in those team settings and things. How do you kind of attack that, knowing that, you're going to have, outliers on both ends of that spectrum, and where do you kind of begin?
Okay. It might seem like a lot in the beginning, but it's really not once you kind of fine tune the process. We assess everything. We don't do a pre-screen when they come in. We don't use the FMS. We don't do any type of movement testing. The entire workout is a test, and every single drill, every exercise, we're assessing it. And so we have a system that we teach, our staff and our interns. It's typically 5 points depending on the exercise, but as they're doing whatever, a jump squat, first we look at how the foot interacts with the ground. So is there pronation, supination? Is the weight distribution up on the balls of the feet? Are they back on their heels? How are they traveling forward in the jumps? Are they moving laterally? Can they control their body? Can they control the way the foot hits the ground and interacts with the ground? Second thing, we move up the chain to the knee. Can you control whether it's medial knee tracking or is it drifting excessively forward? Then we drift up to the pelvis. We look at do you have a lateral shift to the pelvis? Is the pelvic rocking? Do we have a posterior anterior shift depending on the exercise? And then we look at the torso. A lot of athletes will have a lateral torso sway, not being able to control the body over the feet. Sometimes it's excessively rounded, it's excessively extended. And then finally we look at arm action. what is the use of the arms? Are they assisting the motion, using it as a counterbalance? And we just kind of work our way up the chain. Most things will start at the foot. If the foot's bad, the knee's probably not going to be great. The pelvis is probably not going to be great either.
Yeah.
So if we can get them on a more balanced, comfortable stance, looking at how they reposition their feet under their center of mass, controlling that, that helps tie us into not only assessing the stability of the athlete, but also getting them to understand how to quickly create momentum by repositioning the feet under the center of mass. And so that's kind of how we assess it. Every single exercise, we're looking at these key points of observation and working our way through that process. As athletes have mastered these simple patterns with that, can they do it at a slightly more rhythmic speed? Can they do it at a faster speed? Can they do it more dynamically? If they can control their body in these dynamic movements, now it's okay to start adding load. As soon as we start to add load, okay, good. Now we're at an acceptable load for this type of movement. Can we add complexity? Can we add something different? Can we challenge them in different ways? Still looking at the same critical factors, the same key points of observation. How does the foot interact with the ground, the knee above the foot, pelvic action, torso positioning, and so on and so on. And it's a super simple process once you get comfortable looking at it. But what we do with our interns is we will have them grab their phone, have everybody do a hopping exercise. They film the entire group, and then they put the phone away and go back after the session, go back and look at every single athlete, grade them 1 point for each key point of observation if it was perfect. So if they controlled the foot interaction on the ground with the right foot, 1 point. If anything was off, 0. So it's pass fail. And they give them a score, turns into a 10-point score for each athlete. And you can identify right to left, symmetrical imbalances. You can identify exactly where the issues lie. Is it knee? Is it hip? Is it torso? And then now when those kids come back in, you've basically got this checklist of, what to look for, what to cue. If the whole group is off in something, we can regress the exercise a little bit. But it gives you some discussion points. And then what makes it nice is if a parent ever asks, how's my kid doing? And we haven't done any strength work. We haven't tested any jump training. We've just been focused on movement. You can actually do a movement screen with them again, score them. And if the first time they scored a 4 out of 10 and the next time they scored a 8 out of 10, okay, you can say you've improved your movement, coordination by 40%. So we can actually put a numerical value on that, even though it's a little bit subjective. It still works in the parents' eyes. They'll come back and say, yeah, we see it on the court or we see it on the field.
Yeah.
Should we be calling that the Moody movement scale? Is that
we just call it it's our version of the functional movement screen. So, and my thing is, if it's a movement screen, I want you moving.
That's great. Yeah, I like that.
And I think it's very interesting because obviously this is something that gets asked a lot, right? Like, how do you assess? And you have these people that are so adamantly like, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that, right? And you just gave a perfect example of how you created your own way to assess. And as you said, subjective or not, but it allows you a baseline. It allows you to get some information from athletes without necessarily, as you mentioned, like, I really dislike the thought of bringing someone in and like, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to spend the whole first hour or hour and a half and we're just going to run you through these battery of things. And to me, I utilize it mainly in our warm-up where I say my assessment comes from taking you through our warm-up because I'm going to put you in a single leg stance. I'm going to put you into positions where I can find out what your I always steal this from Charlie Weingroff, and if he watches this or whatever, to say the posture and the positions and everything that they walk in the door with is what their brain feels is normal at that time. And it tells me a lot about them. It tells me about their gait. It tells me about their foot strike. It tells me about their posture. And then the next thing I have to do is then see if I start to influence that, how do they react to it? And it allows me to then start formulating things that become my assessment piece that allows me to say, all right, I know these are some of the baseline, lines of defense here that we're going to have to tackle before, which of course is the American way, which is getting to all the cool and cute and complex stuff that everybody expects and wants to do, when the most service you're going to give to them is going to be sometimes, I always say, hey, sorry, it might not be as neat and cutesy as you think, because if we're going to get there, these are the labor pains of performance in my mind.
Well, it's not just that either. I mean, when you talk about any type of movement screen, whether it be the ideas that you have or Joel have, and Joel and I are very similarly aligned on this with a few of the high school athletes I've had that have come through the door, the first thing they've asked me on the first day is, are we not going to max test? And I'm like, okay, hold on a second there, cowboy. You're having difficulty standing up straight. No, we're not going to be max testing today. Okay, so let's not worry about that. But that maybe, Scott, you can speak to that a little bit about, yes, in the performance world, and I'm not even going to go and say high performance or elite performance, just performance in general, athletic performance in general. The tasks that we ask of the athletes and the movement skills that we ask of the athletes really are relatively simple in nature, yet as a culture, you could use the high school level as an example, they're still stuck in the Cretaceous period where we're constantly thinking, yep, the only way I'm going to be able to build a program is to know how much you can squat, and then we'll wheel it off of that. Yeah. And I just can't help but thinking that it's just got to be causing more long-term damage to not permanent damage, but long-term damage to the movement pattern by, as Gray is fond of saying, putting resistance on top of dysfunction.
Yeah, and exactly. So that's everything is movement for us first. Yeah. I want you to move comfortable with your body. I want you to be able to, like we said, move rhythmically, control the landings, move stiffer, be more dynamic. And right then, they've become better. Mm-hmm. If you can fix that now that you move well, okay, now we can start to add load. Now we can start to get stronger. Yeah. And we're going to continue to get better. And I think sometimes some coaches rush into the fun stuff. Mm-hmm. and the high level stuff, and you run out of stuff to do, and now the program stagnates, and you still got to go back and fix those basic things, but the athlete doesn't want to do it because that's beneath them at that point.
Yeah. Or they've already leapfrogged over that, and they look at it as a regression or a punishment or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Scotty, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so that's a really great point, Scott, and this is kind of something that I'm going to be running into with my professional wrestling group, where next week we're absolutely breaking it down back to basics. We're going to be bringing out the PVC pipe and the dowel rod for relearning our hip hinges and squats and basic movements. I know that I've got like a new student or a new athlete coming in that their training age is practically zero. Do you feel like you have to, with regards to group training, do you feel like you have to kind of revert back to meet the needs of a new client, new athlete, in order to make sure that they're doing everything safely?
Absolutely. You have to do that. Now, with our system, the way we've built it, let's say we got a group and you've got 3 different levels in the group. You've got experienced lifters that can do just about anything and do it well. You've got some that are still kind of learning some things, but they got a pretty good concept of what's going on. And then you've got somebody who has no clue. And they all come at the same time.
Standard team dynamic.
Yeah. So, and let's say something advanced. Let's look at cleans. So we're doing cleans. With everybody, we start with a basic jump training progression. So sticking in power position, being able to put quick concentric force into the ground, max height on the jumps, landing in a stuck position. And that's part of our warm up for everybody. So even the advanced kids, they're getting something out of it. They feel that it's beneficial. Mm-hmm. Then we put dumbbells in their hands and we'll take them through a warm-up complex. It might be with lighter dumbbells going through that hip hinge that you talked about, working into some high pulls, working into what we call a quick clean, which is basically a hip hinge, kind of an RDL up into a front curl to the shoulders. If you're using a barbell to do that, it's phenomenal for teaching the catch of a clean, where the bar never comes above the shoulders. It rolls right up the body on the shoulders with quick elbows. Going into some front squats or dumbbell squats, or if you've got that new kid, he's just doing body weight squats. And then we put in what we call a jump clean that we typically would do with dumbbells, but we also use a bar where they pause in that RDL position, that power position, bar just above the knees or dumbbells just above the knees, jump as high as you can with straight arms, and then attack the bar, attack the dumbbells, and stick the landing in a position you can jump out of. What it teaches is to use the legs in a clean instead of just making it a shoulder exercise. Great for females, great for that lower body power, and we can go down that road. Now, if you've got somebody who, let's say those mid-level kids are not comfortable with the barbell, well, we can't do cleans with them, but we can jump squat. So we can use dumbbells or trap bars, and we can do max height, max effort jumps with dumbbells that are appropriately loaded, which I can talk about later. And they're getting the same lower body power benefit as the group that's doing cleans. Mm-hmm. And the new kid that's doing jump squats is still getting higher volume jump landing training, benefiting him as well. And then as he gets comfortable with dumbbells, you slowly start to add those complexes in his warm-ups, you add in jump squats, you add in front squats with the barbell towards the end of that session. And then all of a sudden, the first time we teach that athlete to do a clean with the bar, seriously, it takes one set of 5. It takes one set of 5 and they've got it mastered. Yeah. Because you built the patterns and you built the comfort with the bar on the shoulders, you built all these things, but you haven't lost training time because they've still been jumping max effort. Right. They've still been, performing these movements. So their vertical is going up. They feel stronger. They feel more powerful, more confident with these things before we even get into cleans.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the evolution for me, especially when I think about that in itself, is that used to be me. My younger strength coach was, well, we're going to start with a new team and it's a new season, a new year, whatever. First thing we have to do is start teaching clean progression, right? And you end up like looking back now and I go, holy cow, how much time. And don't get me wrong, I value Olympic lifting. I value the clean. I value snatches. I value all the pushing movements and those types of things. But I look back and go, man, how many hours did I have kids stand there and watch me go through a progression of a shrug and a pull and a front squat and all these other things, and I go, we could have done a lot better. And by we, I mean me. I could have done a lot better. Yeah. And I look at that now and how I teach, like you said, that the same type of thing is if I start to ingrain the pattern, if I start to ingrain the notion of them moving things quickly and hip hinging and getting into that, whether that's that loaded position or whatever else, all of a sudden it's like kind of that part whole method where you indirectly taught them something that they didn't necessarily even know that you're kind of like in a roundabout way backdooring them into teaching them a movement that they inherently found out they already knew how to do. You just kind of pieced that whole thing together into what then becomes a more dynamic full scale, like a clean or a dumbbell or a snatch or whatever that might be. So I love that kind of thinking, and I used to utilize, like you mentioned, where the thought of it being extremely successful with your female athletes and things like that. I use that train of thought all the time with when I was a college strength and conditioning coach, where you'd inevitably have female athletes that come in and like, hey coach, like I don't want to get big. Am I going to get big if I come in the weight room, And I would go through that progression of, like you said, I don't have to put you under the bar with this loaded down, kind of mentality where if I teach you speed of movement and I teach you movement mechanics and we work on the velocity behind things, the outcome and the goal of what we're trying to accomplish, not only does it translate better, it's not devaluing the need for strength and those types of things.
Not at all.
But I can increase those qualities without just shoving you under a bar all day.
Yeah.
Would you
See,
agree?
I agree 100%. And in the early stages of our program, we had, records boards for, cleans and vertical jumps and speed. And none of those things really were impacting on-field performance.
Right.
And so the records were basically my records. It's what I wanted to do.
Right.
It wasn't what the athlete wanted. So we went back and said, we're taking cleans out because it's too complicated to teach, takes too much time. It doesn't matter to them. And we put in, more of a jump squat, type progression.
Mm-hmm.
And then before we knew it, it's like, they're like, hey, can we use the bar? And we got right back into cleans, and it was so much easier to teach.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think the other part of that too is I had one of my clients come to me and say, my high school coach is telling me I have to clean. I know we haven't worked on this, because we were doing everything else, all the other foundational movement patterns leading up to that. But the high school coach is like, we're cleaning today. And that's pretty much the level of instruction that they're getting. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. This is like a puppy crossing the highway here. We got to intervene and really make sure that they're not going to get hurt when they go in there. So at least I'm going to take this session and do my best to make sure that he's, his technique is sound. So on the day when they walk in there with no instruction, no safety, no nothing, that at least I know that he's not going to get hurt. And I think that goes back to what I was saying about, the difference between what's happening at these high school level strength and conditioning programs versus what we're trying to do for a living, which is create a stronger, more injury resistant athlete that will be able to perform at a high level in their sport.
And how much easier would it be for the high school coaches if they would just take this simple approach instead of trying to you could control your volume so much better. You could control time in the weight room.
Yeah.
So it'd be so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like to call that the traditional football coefficient, which is, the strongest, the guy who's the highest on the leaderboards in the weight room is sitting on the bench on Saturdays, and you go, well, why is that so valuable to us if they're not capable of moving? It's like, how many times you have an athlete come in, they go, well, coach, are we going to bench today or whatever? And I go, you know what? If you're laying down on your back, I said, you're either on the bench or you got into that position in a really bad way. And either way, you're really no good to me. Like, I need you to be able to move. I need you to be able to not only deliver force, but sometimes absorb force. I need you to be able to do a lot of different things that, again, is there value in it? Sure. In contextual speaking, of course. But at the same time, it is the understanding of translation of what you're asking them to do, what you're focused on getting them to do, and how it is actually going to put them in more successful positions when they go out and do what they're intending and wanting and desiring to do in the first place, right? It's like, I love that kids get motivated and want to train, but ultimately, as you mentioned earlier, Scott, it's like their goal is not that. Their goal is what happens out where they get a chance to be successful.
Right.
We're a byproduct of that, right?
And the sooner you realize that as a coach, that your goals about weight room numbers and things like that are not necessarily your athlete's goals, the quicker you get away from that stuff and into the stuff that really matters.
That's a great piece of advice.
Most definitely. Well, I think that's a perfect segue for us to get into. We like to try and end our podcast sessions with what we call our Fast Five. And the Fast Five is we have a litany of words that begin with the letter F, and they're all clean in this case. But they are questions that we like to fire towards you. We're going to give you 5 of them, and want to see kind of, and they may not have anything to do with strength and conditioning, just so you're prepared. These come from all angles. So, are you going to?
I'm ready.
JC's ready. Here we go.
All right.
Yeah.
First one. Favorite food.
Favorite food. It doesn't have to start with the letter F.
No, no,
It
no,
does
no,
not.
no,
It can
no.
be anything you
No.
want.
Your answers are completely
yeah.
open in the
I'm a burn-ins guy. If you know burn-ins, barbecue.
Oh, but yeah, I get that.
What's that?
Barbecue, man.
Oh, seriously?
He's sitting in the hub of barbecue down there, of course. So just as a quick caveat to that, what's your favorite barbecue place in your neighborhood there?
There's a place that opened up about a year ago called Q's, and I absolutely love it. But Jack Stack, Gates, Oklahoma Joe's, there's some great barbecue in Kansas City.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Is there a place called the Salt Lick? Is that?
Salt Lick. There's a ton of places here.
Yeah, yeah. I went to that last time I was down there. I went to that. I think it was at the CSCCA conference. So go number 2.
Okay. First coaching job.
First coaching job. I was a GA in the weight room at Louisiana Tech.
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
Home of the Bulldogs.
There you go. All right. Favorite recent book that you read? So that would be within, let's say the last year.
Oh man. Probably Grit.
Grit. There we go.
Yeah.
Love it.
Good call.
Yeah,
Good call.
That's one on the reading list for us too. So we're big fans of that. Okay. Fan sport, i.e., a sport that you have nothing to do with or may not coach, but if it is on TV, you are going to click it and watch it.
It's got to be football, right?
That's an F word.
Yeah, no, that counts.
That's like
Yeah.
a daily double right there.
Yeah, that is. Okay. And then I noticed that you're a canine owner. He's been photobombing us in the background there. So, favorite thing to do with the dogs?
I run with my dogs.
You run with the dogs. That's good.
Yep.
Nice.
So they push me. They're my training partners. So they push me to run faster. So that's
yeah. I've got a 9-month-old puppy, and he doesn't understand pace whatsoever.
No.
So we do sprint intervals until I have to yank him into a stop so that I can catch my breath.
I have 2 German Shepherds, and I run with one, bring him home, grab the other one, take him out, and finish my run. So,
wow.
That's impressive. Very cool. All right.
Was that all 5 already?
That's all 5 already.
That was quick.
Wow, that was efficient.
That was fast.
That was fast. That is the fast
what we're all
5. That's
about,
what we're
so.
working on, yeah.
Well, very cool. I want to make sure, first of all, thank you, Scott. Number one, it's good to catch up with you. Glad to see things are going well for you. Really appreciate your time. We also want to make sure that people know how to contact you. Website is athletefit.com. The one thing that we didn't necessarily touch on that I would highly recommend is Scott has a lot of information about some of the educational courses that he teaches on there. Mm-hmm. He's developed an app that is also available that you can find on there, and just a whole host of other things that he does. And social media outlets, I know you're pretty active. I notice your Twitter feed and things that you put out on there all the time. Go out and follow Scott and find him. Not only will you find a lot of great content, but I find myself picking up ideas and drills and things like that from you all the time. So whether you know it or not, I'm stealing from you as much as I possibly can.
we steal from each other.
Yeah. So I think it's the greatest form of flattery.
That's
and,
right.
We really appreciate you stopping in and spending some time with us today. So thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been fun to catch up. Thanks, guys.
All right.
You bet. Thank you, Scott.
See you next time.